Well, let me welcome you to the first event of this year's Upton Forum. My name is Warren Palmer from the Department of Economics, and it's been my pleasure to organize this year's Upton Forum and to teach the senior seminar in economics, which is on this topic of this year's Upton Forum, which is economic policy and the challenges of climate change. And we have as our 2014 Upton Scholar Robert N. Stavens, who will be making comments toward the end of this panel. Let me tell you first a little bit about the Upton Forum. This forum was funded by alumni of the college who wanted to honor Miller Upton, who was the 6th president of Beloit College. And this forum concerns the wealth and well-being of nations. And this is a topic that was very important to his career. He devoted his career to advancing the ideals of the liberal society, political freedom, the rule of law, and the promotion of peace and prosperity. So each year for the past 7 years, we have honored him and we've honored those ideals by inviting one of the world's prominent thinkers who's been making significant contributions to our understanding of those things that determine the wealth and well-being of nations. Tonight's panel discussion is on energy efficiency, climate change, and entrepreneurship. And I'll say just a couple of words about this theme and then give brief introductions to the panelists, and we'll move to their presentations as quickly as possible. Professor Stavens has just recently returned from a meeting of the IPCC in Copenhagen. And the most recent report by the IPCC, the summary report says the following: observed changes and their causes. This is related to climate change. Human influence on the climate system is clear, and recent anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases are the highest in history. Recent climate changes have had widespread impacts on human and natural systems. Second, warming of the climate system is unequivocal, and since the 1950s, many of the observed changes are unprecedented over decades to millennia. The atmosphere and ocean have warmed, the amounts of snow and ice have diminished, and sea levels have risen. So we are seeing the effects of climate change, but still most of those effects are in, for each of us here tonight, a somewhat distant future. Our children or our grandchildren will be most affected by those. There are things that we can do today to limit the emissions of greenhouse gases due to human activity, but those things are costly. So this year's Upton panel is looking at how economic policy can help us understand the ways in which to make those changes at the lowest possible cost. We have two great challenges related to this. One, there are many people in the world who don't have access to the energy services that we take for granted, that we're using in this room tonight to give ourselves the comfort and the freedom to have this discussion. So we need to expand commercial energy services in the developing nations. So we need more inanimate energy, not less. But at the same time, we need to begin to restrict the amount of that inanimate energy that comes from fossil fuels. This is hard work. This is a long process. Energy transitions take a long time. So in this panel, we're going to look at the opportunities for energy efficiency in the built environment. We'll start with Mark Hanson. Mark is an old friend. When I was in graduate school, I first met him. He's the Sustainability Director of Hoffman Planning, Design, and Construction Incorporated. Prior to that, he was the Executive Director of the Energy Center of Wisconsin. On his left is Dan Schoof, the Chief of Staff and Secretary of Beloit College. And previously, he had been the Deputy Secretary and Secretary of Administration for the state of Wisconsin in the Doyle administration, and had served as the Chief of Staff of the Wisconsin Public Service Commission. Tom Shannonbrook, a former student, class of 00, in the economics department, subsequently received his MBA from the University of Michigan, and now works with McCaffrey Interests, a developer in Chicago that's working on the Chicago Lakeside development. And then our final speaker will be John Norquist, mayor of Milwaukee from 1998 to 2004, and the president and CEO of the Congress for the New Urbanism from 2004 to 2014. So each of them will speak 15 to 20 minutes, and at the conclusion of their talk, we'll invite Professor Stavens to respond to what he has heard, and then we will turn this over to the audience to ask questions of all the panelists and Dr. Stavens. So please let us welcome our panelists, and we'll have Mark Hanson as our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. As you can see, I've already fast-forwarded you to Thursday night with the title on my opening slide that this is renewable energy, climate change, and entrepreneurship. But I will cover some of energy efficiency as well. The reason I was invited to share some ideas with you this evening is probably because of a guest lecture I gave in an environmental economics class at this college in 2012, and a subsequent lecture I gave the following year. The theme of both lectures was how our firm had found a way to deliver highly sustainable or green commercial buildings at equal to or less than conventional cost. In the course of those lectures, I had noted that payback analysis did not work very well when applied to green buildings. Payback analysis in that context was at best a limited tool, in my view, and at worst highly misleading. Frankly, traditional payback analysis was getting in the way of our clients making good choices in buying green commercial buildings. At the time I made those remarks, I had not related them to entrepreneurial activity. I had not even considered whether the commercial building design and construction services that we were providing to our clients would be categorized as entrepreneurial. Our focus for the last 15 years had been on seeing whether we could provide green buildings in all of our projects, not some, and survive in the marketplace that was dominated by conventional buildings. As part of being a provider of green buildings in the marketplace, we were focused on designing and constructing products that lived up to our green claims and allowed us to stay in business and be profitable. The nature of what is meant by a green building is rapidly evolving. The green buildings of the first decade of the 21st century emphasized energy and water efficiency, responsible materials and products, good indoor air quality, among other attributes. That view has rapidly expanded in the second decade of the 21st century to now encompass net zero energy, or at least a net zero energy capability. A net zero energy building is one that produces as much energy on site from renewable resources as it needs over the course of the year. Such a building will typically import power from the grid at some times and export power to the grid at other times of the year. An office building that uses less than about 40,000 BTU per square foot per year is considered to be net zero energy capable, i.e. a good opportunity for meeting its needs with on-site renewables, usually solar photovoltaic. Warren's invitation to participate on this panel gave me reason to reflect further on what we've been doing at our firm since the turn of the century. That reflection was aided by a very helpful 2010-2011 annual proceedings of this forum, recognizing the work of Israel Kurtzner. It led me to quickly realize that what we were doing at Hoffman in green buildings was an entrepreneurial activity, as described by Kurtzner. Deidre McCloskey in those proceedings asks and answers a rhetorical question. What works? Creativity, innovation, discovery. What we were doing at our firm's continuous innovation, testing, monitoring, and benchmarking was entrepreneurship. Our product was green. It cost our clients less than conventional buildings. And we were surviving and profitable as a firm during the last recession that was particularly a difficult time for our industry. More importantly, I could also observe many other firms in various parts of the sprawling green building industry complex also being entrepreneurial and as a result rapidly transforming the nature of buildings and particularly commercial buildings, which is the area we work in. I want to draw a direct line between entrepreneurship and renewable energy and climate change. A green building, if it is actually green, including performing green, uses less electricity and natural gas than existing or conventional new buildings, and hence reduces greenhouse gas emissions in their operation. The reduced level of energy use also enables on-site energy to meet much or even all of the energy needs. Depending on the building size, design, and location, a net zero energy building may be feasible from the standpoint of physics and from the standpoint of economics. And a net zero building is a net zero carbon footprint, at least in operation. The physics feasibility for a net zero building using solar is related to whether you can provide the needed energy for the building given the surface area available, including roof area, area over parking, vertical surfaces, and finally land area for ground-mounted solar systems. For high-rise buildings, net zero energy will not be feasible. For many 1, 2, and even 3-story buildings, however, it is feasible. The argument for economic feasibility is whether on-site renewables can compete with purchasing energy from the utility company. The case for on-site renewable energy has becomes particularly salient when a net zero energy building can be delivered in the marketplace for less than or equal to the first cost of a conventional building. I'll define first cost as the total of all design and construction costs up front. My assertion based on our work and that of others is that a green net zero energy building can be delivered at conventional first cost in some common situations in 2014. If this assertion holds, we can readily see why the payback analysis does not work. The usual paradigm that we've had drilled into our psyche is that to get a commercial building that will have a lower monthly energy bill, we're going to have to invest up front. Better boilers, better chillers, better lighting, you name it. And these will cost more. The building owner can, of course, pay this back over the course of the coming months and years with lower energy bills. What I've just asserted, however, is that there does not need to be an additional upfront cost, and there may be a first cost reduction. Thus, the payback calculation yields a 0-year payback or a negative year payback. I want to briefly note 7 events in our timeline at the firm that has brought us to this point and show you a couple of examples. The first starting point, our first event was when we tried this out on ourselves at our own headquarters building in 1999. We found that when we built this building, it was about 40,000 square feet, we stayed within our conventional budget. And our conventional budget was below the local market averages. By 2002, as we progressed, the next notable event in our timeline was we've been doing a set of biophoresis clinics for a major pharmaceutical company. We had done about 19 of these buildings, and it was time to retool, and we said, let's retool and do the next batch, green. And at the time, I had construction managers petrified, we're going to slit our throats, and we're going to be out of business. Well, we had our debates inside the firm proceeded, and the first new clinic that was now green out of the box had about a 5% reduction in construction costs. And so did our subsequent projects. In 2004, this is an image from one of our next notable events. And this was our participation in a Class A office building on a derelict site in St. Louis, 115,000 square feet. And it was green from the start. It was another architect we were working with. That was fine. We came into a design meeting, and our budget for this $16.5 million project was $3.5 million over budget. But in the course of that meeting, we made a number of choices of things that did not need to be in that project, certainly not for green. Got the architect a bit mad at us, but we pulled $2.5 million and greened the building further in the course of that meeting. Ultimately, this building is set a record for a LEED Platinum rating under the LEED version 2.0, and it came in at the very bottom of the cost structure for any LEED certified buildings and below market cost in St. Louis for Class A office buildings. Fast forward a couple more years, and we decided, well, based on what we've learned in this experience, now let's go kind of all out, apply it to some public schools. And here is a elementary school on the left and a public high school on the right. They're both the first LEED certified new schools in Wisconsin. And in both cases, you can see the average regional cost averages on the left, construction cost, and on the right, you can see our total project cost for these LEED Gold certified schools. We've also tracked all of these buildings we're discussing tonight since we built them, so we know how they're operating in terms of energy use. Our next project that we then is in our timeline is, having found out to this point what we thought we were capable of, we said, let's push the envelope, build a building that can really drive down that energy use further, make it that zero net energy capable at 40,000 BTU per square foot per year. And so we proceeded and attempted that at a monastery building, which is really within its campus is an office, really sort of an academic or office building, 35,000 square feet outside of Madison, Wisconsin. This is Holy Wisdom Monastery. The conventional energy budget for an average building would be around 80 to 90,000 BTU per square foot per year. This one we've been monitoring, and it's been running at about 32 to 33,000 BTU per square foot. Before we talk about the solar that is also on this project. There was some initially. We'll talk about this in a minute here. The next step in our innovation process came when we then revisited this project, and I'll show you an image of this in a moment, where we then retrofitted 125 kW additional solar on this that brings this building to getting quite close to zero net energy. And what was interesting about this is we used an innovative method of co-ownership so that the owner of the building did not have to fund the solar system up front. The system is paid off in the course of, you pay for your solar energy delivery in place of your electricity bill you'd be paying the utility. The last innovative step that we have not gotten to yet is when we hit the right site where we can do a full zero net energy building. We can't do it in Wisconsin because our regulations currently don't enable that, but we have some other states we're working in that probably allow us to. So in the course of following this entrepreneurial path, the outcome that we now foresee in terms of zero net energy at conventional costs, we had not imagined that at the outset of our journey. What we had done is described by Kurtzner. the availability of pure profit opportunities, which in ways we admittedly do not fully understand, attract entrepreneurial attention. We found ways to take costs out of our projects as they became greener, resulting in the ability to increase revenue, profitability, and even as we emerge from the last recession. This phenomenon of finding innovation that reduces first cost as performance improves in green buildings, in apparent contradiction to marginal cost efficiency curves, has been previously described, and it's right here in this figure, by Hawken et al., so Hawken, Lovins, and Lovins, as tunneling through the cost barrier. The first time I heard this concept about 20 years ago, I recall thinking, boy, this sounded great. And it was hopeful, but I really didn't get it. I couldn't come up with the tangible examples at the time of how it would work. It was only many years later, as in our work, we reduced the number of light fixtures while using better lights, chose windows that controlled unwanted heat gain and managed glare, managed plug loads, downsized HVAC systems, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, and used innovative financial arrangements for on-site solar, that I realized that these were the tools for tunneling through the cost barrier. The images that I'm showing you in the next slide are now from Holy Wisdom Monastery, where we've, instead of forever going up that diminishing returns curve, we took a dramatic change and reintegrated the design and took those costs out. So this is one image of Holy Wisdom Monastery with the initial solar system we put on only at 20 kW. Another image of the monastery. And to set this in a context, well, how competitive is this building really? What this graph here represents is a set of academic buildings similar to the room mix at the monastery, this particular building, set on campuses across the U.S. Each one of those bars is a building. The light gray is a non-certified or non-green building. And you can see there's a couple gold ones that are gold certified, LEED gold certified, a couple silver that are the silver certified, and some green ones that were just the basic level certified buildings. You can see no pattern there. If it's more green, does it cost more or not? There's no apparent pattern. And what's interestingly is Holy Wisdom Monastery, when we put it on this chart, adjusted for year and adjusted for geographic location, we're off the chart. We are at the low end. You can see that at about $230 per square foot adjusted to a Sacramento, California location. The final image that I'm going to show you here is an aerial view of the monastery now in 2014 after this summer's edition of the solar at no first cost to the owner. I was going to say the first cost of the monastery building was not altered, as investors are financing that investment apart from a small portion that was received from a state incentive program, the Focus on Energy program. The investment is paid off in the form of monthly payments diverted from the utility bill with a residual value buyout in year 15. One might think that the Holy Wisdom Monastery example would make future marketing and sales of our green building services a slam dunk. We certainly use this and other examples in our marketing, and they are helpful. Buyers in the marketplace, however, often have reservations. Working with hesitant buyers is not unique to us as a firm, as I've heard similar comments from other firms offering similar levels of green buildings at similar price points. One explanation for this hesitancy by building buyers might be that the concepts of marginal cost curves and payback analysis for added efficiency or renewable investments are so ingrained in the marketplace that the potential buyers can't fathom the notion of tunneling through the cost barrier. And even if one project managed the tunneling, can the buyer of, say, a 10, 20, 40, $60 million building, and these are in the price ranges of our buildings, can they be confident that the process is reproducible for their project? There is a tendency for buyers to focus on single project elements, those LED lights, for example, and want to think in terms of paybacks on each element rather than looking at aggregate project costs before and after the tunneling. Hence my comment at the beginning of my remarks that payback analysis seems to sometimes get in the way. And in our buyers' defense, most of them are not out routinely making $20 and $30 and $40 million decisions, so it's hard stuff for them. This story of entrepreneurship in green buildings is emblematic of the larger trends that I believe are common in the commercial building industry. The materials, mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, windows, including emerging smart windows, the emergence of building control systems are all rapidly evolving. Fluorescent lighting has given way to even more efficient LED lighting. The lighting in this room is obsolete, even though it may be quite new. Other highly sustainable net zero buildings with good cost points are also appearing on the landscape. The Iowa Utility Board's new office building in Des Moines is a case in point, as is the Bullitt Foundation building in Seattle. It is this rapidly evolving entrepreneurial action that offers significant prospect for pulling down, to use Paul Hawkins' phrase, CO2 emissions in the new commercial buildings and in retrofitting existing buildings. With these entrepreneurial paths, what these entrepreneurial paths desperately need for widespread use of on-site solar and other renewables in green buildings, however, is the adoption of smart grids and smart building controls so that we can use energy price signals to enable the use of on-site and off-site renewable energy. So we can optimize power generation and transmission and provide incentives for energy storage, including the cost of carbon emissions in the marketplace would obviously be of great help in accelerating the marketplace for zero net energy buildings. Without regulatory changes in smart grids, we will continue to bump up against the limits we now face in Wisconsin that prevented Holy Wisdom Monastery from going somewhere on the order of 60 to 80% net zero to 100% net zero this summer. I hope my remarks have offered some perspective on how entrepreneurial activity is driving the green building movement. If we can provide net zero energy buildings at the same first cost as conventional buildings with the tools and methods we have in hand today, there is opportunity and some hope looking forward as we take up the challenges of climate change. Thank you.
I'll cue this up for you. Which one is your?
The second one right there. All right, and then, all right. Thank you very much, Warren. Thank you, Mark. That's wonderful. Appreciate the invitation to be here tonight. I can tell you that at the outset, the thing I told Warren when he called in the spring and whether ultimately I'd be willing to be a guest here, I told him that I'm going to have, there's always going to be more questions than answers in this project. So some of the things I'm going to bring here today are at a really crucial time in this powerhouse project for the college. Tomorrow we'll unveil some designs, and there'll be the formal launch of the more formal fundraising aspect of the campaign to build this building for the college. But that leaves a lot of questions to be answered, so I'll walk through those today. All right, so we will walk through a quick history of the project. We're going to review the plans, and then get you situated here, and then we'll go into the energy aspects of the building. So this first part is interesting, and I'll try to go through it sort of quickly so I don't use up all of my time. So just a reminder, we're talking about a power plant that's across Pleasant Avenue, Highway 51 from Beloit College, right across from the Sports Center. And it's been our neighbor for 100 years. The first phase of this building was built in 1913. I'll give you a aerial site of the building. You can see Aldrich Field and the residential side of campus, the Sports Center, the hydroelectric dam, the fishing bridge across there, and the power plant and the coal yard is what we're talking about here today. Here's a view from above campus. The building on the left was built in 1913 by a company called the Beloit Light, Gas, and Coke Company, and it was founded by Charles Butler Salmon, who was also a Beloit College Board of Trustee, and he was also involved in the founding of the Eclipse Windmill Company, which became Fairbanks Morse. He later got ill, sold all his assets, and lived for another 40 years and founded the electric utility here in Wisconsin. So that's a theme, I think, sometimes in these histories. Here's a view that Fred found for me of the campus and the power plant, and when its first two phases were built, but not the third. So this is taken sometime in the 30s. Get a nice view of campus. And then came the construction during the tail end of World War II. And I've spent a little bit of time on this history, and I find the history of this building really interesting to the industrial history of Wisconsin. By that time, it's Wisconsin Power and Light, and they go to the War Production Board in 1942 and ask permission to use this steel to build this building, and they're turned down. They say, wait a little bit, and they get permission later during the war, and the Cunningham Brother Construction Company from Beloit starts building this. And I'm showing you a few of these just to show you what's being turned over to us. Alliant is going to turn this building over to us. They'll remove their equipment, but you see the structure left behind. It's 100% steel frame structure in all three sections. So at the time, this is designed in the late 30s, so we're buying over-engineered steel frame building designed to support boilers, and all of our structural analysis suggests that it should last a long time. So you'll see this, a picture from 1948. That's in the end of 1948. The building is almost closed in. I think it's actually a little out of order here. Here's a little earlier. You see the coal bunkers in place and the structure that will later house the Babcock's and Wilcox boiler. Two of those were put in there. So here's a view before the clean air scrubbers that were put on in the 70s. So I see a few alumni from prior to 1975 in the room. So if you were here on campus, the coal was burned and it went right out that smokestack with no filters at all up until about 1975. So, but that environmental equipment will be removed in our project, and this will be sort of the view of from that side. So this project has been underway for a couple of years, and we had to decide what was needed. One of the rooms we really liked was this turbine gallery, where the 225 megawatt turbines still sit today, and that'll feature into our designs. But certainly, I approached it from thinking that this is a really interesting and fun building to work on, but we needed to know what the needs of the campus were. So just to remind you, there's been two different campus-led programming committees with students, faculty, and staff on there to decide sort of what is the need for our new recreation and student union. So this is the short list. Significant student center space, essentially a new student union. We need expanded and integrated fitness center. We need a big open space. We need a replacement for the Marvin Fieldhouse. We plan to have a turf gym that has football practice, baseball, softball, lacrosse, ultimate frisbee, and so on, men's and women's lacrosse, and other turf activities. that's a need for us. Marvin Fieldhouse has reached the end of its useful life. We need a new pool. If we're going to have a swimming and diving team, we need to have a new 25-yard pool. We want to have an indoor training track. We want to move the Health and Wellness Center from Porter into this Center of Health and Wellness. We can't have a Beloit College building without some food there. We want to have a lot of flexible spaces, including a lecture hall a little bit bigger than this, but smaller than Wilson. That's the current campus priorities. And then we, for the first time in our 170 years, we want to be a river college that's down on the river. So we went through different iterations of this, and in the end, we hired Jeannie Gang out of Chicago, MacArthur Genius Award winner, Belvedere native, and her sister Susan runs our Beloit College magazine too, so we might have had an inside track in hiring her. The first thing her team did was try to learn from the campus and what we've done. I made her staff steal one of her sketchbooks, and as she started thinking about this, and she honed in on this growth in the building from just a dam in 1880 to that early 1908, 1913 to 1929. They added the coal, conveyor belts, it got bigger, Clean Air Act, and so on. So there's this history of building on this structure across the street from the campus. And then I'll spend a minute and then get in some interesting things about how we're going to use energy in this building quickly. So this is the view looking south in that turbine gallery. That earlier shot was from 1950. This is from 2012. And the concept that this would turn into our student center, student union, and this is the view that she has put together, preserving the wainscoting, the exposed brick, feeding that track through here, and adding a lecture hall down below. You're seeing the back of it there, preserving the existing quarry tile that's in there. Looking north, you see the structure that's there and the space, and the idea is that you can keep that structure and move the equipment and build into there. So how do we tackle energy use and greenhouse gases, and what should be our goal here? And along with Jeannie Gang, as part of the selection process, she brought an engineering firm called DBHMS, and their lead engineer and principal of the firm, Sachin Anand, to the team. And the first thing he said to us as we were going through this selection is that I don't know if we're going to do LEED Platinum. I don't know if we're going to do zero net energy. We need to get in there and figure out what the building wants to do and what the setting takes it. And I'm going to simplify this, and I'm going to need lots of help going forward. I've had a lot of help with students that are in the room, faculty, staff that are here today, and we're going to need a lot of help going forward as this fundraising phase gets underway. But this issue right here needs a great deal of study, is how are we going to treat energy in this building, and essentially what's our aspirations for that energy use index. And the 40 that Mark talked about, what is our goal going to be in this building? So here's what Sachin came up with, is you have a building that would have been torn down. You have a beautiful interior exposed brick, steel, and concrete. We don't have a stitch of insulation in the building. We have exterior bricks that, not during the early lifetime of the building, but during the late lifetime when it was turned on and turned off, had a lot of vertical cracking in the bricks. So repair or historic preservation would actually mean ordering new bricks. And I don't know throwing away the old bricks and putting new ones into place, I'm not sure that's really restoration. But then again, we have this incredible thermal mass of that brick, steel, and concrete. And we have the river. And we have the college's desire to be a leader in sustainability, energy, and climate, and a willingness to let the study of this guide us, just the way we did with the science building. You know, I see Brock and Yaffa and others in the room here, just the way that the whole campus community thought through that building and ultimately produced a LEED Platinum building. That's the same sort of process here. So it's 4 pictures here that sums it up for what we're doing on energy. We want to preserve the inside of this building. You can't quite see still the quarry tile that was laid in 1945. It's sort of an orange in this. It's a little covered with stuff in this picture. You have this sort of elementary school looking wainscoting, ceramic tile, and you have this exposed brick and exposed concrete, precast concrete on the ceiling. You have this thermal mass. This is part of the basement of the building. One of the largest zero net energy buildings in North America is the National Renewable Energy Lab. That's about 260,000 square feet. They built a thermal mass like this. They poured concrete that looks just like this because it can store energy in a way that we're being given this thermal mass as essentially a gift to the college. And Sachin and Jeannie suggest we take advantage of it. Here's the bricks. This is what we call cock pointing in the industry, I guess. Any of the vertical lines, I know it's a little bit at an angle, but those are cracked bricks, and they would require more than tuck pointing. They would require repair. So, and then we have this resource. We call it the Rock River. At this point, it's this is a tail 10 acres of a 100 to 200 acre reservoir, essentially behind the dam. It's about 14, 15 feet deep here. And so we have this water resource here that some of the energy is already being harnessed through the hydro facility, but there's a lot of latent energy in the water. So that's what Sachin said. You take these four things together, and then he introduced in a seminar we held in March this concept of thermal comfort, and that we need to start thinking about thermal comfort a little differently than just putting setting the thermostat to 72 if you're chilly and 68 if you're green. You know, it's much different than that. And, you know, we think about how the body feels the temperature because he's introducing the concept of radiant heating and actually radiant in all 6 surfaces of a room. So, again, that's the concept that you would use essentially a geothermal system. You'd use the energy from the water, and you would be able to extract latent energy from there through a heat pump, but also there's often times in the year that you'd actually not even have to extract energy. Other than the pumping loads, you'd be able to use that temperature to cool the slab or to warm it in time. So this is a concept that I would say we're exploring right now and we're excited about. But like all things at Beloit, we're not going to do it to get a press release. We're going to do it that it makes sense, the science makes sense, the economics makes sense. So these are some things that Sachin brought to our March seminar, and then I'll finish up here in a minute. Where a traditional envelope, you could insulate it on the inside or the outside. If you insulate it on the inside, that thermal mass on the outside would heat up, and you'd be fighting it. If you insulate it on the outside, you just still have that transfer of energy. But what he's suggesting is you actually use that existing concrete and masonry as the radiant surfaces. So you'd actually put flexible PEX tubing and run heated or cooled water through it. And it's much different than we're used to. You might have had some experience with radiant floors, but this is surfaces and all, and it's also used for heating and cooling. In the winter, we reversed that. It's interesting as they talk about summer and heating, which I guess was back here. It's much different than pumping cold air at 55 degrees or lower through this. This is bringing the slab temperature to something above the dew point. It's really going to be fascinating for people in this room to help me and others dive into that and figure out if it's cost effective. So I wanted to, here's his design of that, and there'll be plenty of fresh air introduced into the building. What would this mean for us? What does it mean? Well, economics. We're not exactly sure what the energy use, what we'll pay, but median building would probably be expected to be about a $300,000 a year. But if we were to reduce that by 70%, like Mark has suggested is possible, you bring that down, so you're using, MMBTUs per square feet, 40 to 50 instead of 150. So that's significant savings, a significant reduction in greenhouse gas, and the question that we will answer over the next 6 to 9 months is the first cost less or not, or is it more? And right now, You know, when you talk to folks that are used to putting in conventional heating and cooling systems, they say the cost is going to be more. The folks that we're talking to and people like Mark can attest to is sometimes you can't accept that as an answer. You have to study it and make sure. So I'll finish with this little collage of images inside the building, and thank you for having me here today, Warren. Thank you.
So now we're going to move from talking about single buildings to talking about larger new urban development with Tom Shannonbrook.
Is there, get the PowerPoint?
Oh, yes, let me get you set up. Slight detail.
It helps.
Let's see, which one is yours? The one that says Shannonbrook? There we go. And you can advance with this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. As I drove up today, I was thinking about the last time I stood at the front of this room, and it was during my senior symposium about 15 years ago. And
Just like your senior symposium, we're going to ask you to use the microphone.
so it was 15 years ago at my senior symposium, and the lectern was on that side of the room, but it didn't feel much different than this. Although at the time I was talking about, and probably much to the chagrin of my economics professors, I was talking about a religious studies topic. And so I thank Warren for inviting me today to help me redeem myself in their eyes. Today I'm going to talk about a project that I work on in Chicago called Chicago Lakeside. This is a 600-acre piece of land on the south side of Chicago that used to be the U.S. Steel Southworks site, one of the largest steel manufacturing sites in the country. So my firm, McCaffrey Interests, is partners with U.S. Steel in the Chicago Lakeside development. U.S. Steel, again, is the legacy landowner. And we partnered with them about 9 years ago. I'm sorry. So we partnered with U.S. Steel 9 years ago on this site, and we've been working on it ever since. The site sits 10 miles south of the Loop in Chicago, 3 miles south of the University of Chicago, and directly adjacent to the Indiana border. As I said, it's a legacy land site. And if you look at the site as it sits today, all the land that you see where the buildings are built was not there when the site, when U.S. Steel started manufacturing steel. During World War I, or just before World War I, the U.S. War Department asked U.S. Steel to build out the site so that they could manufacture more steel for the war effort. So over the course of about 40 years, U.S. Steel built out the site and was an important manufacturer of steel for both World War I's and World War II. Following that, many of the buildings that we know today in downtown Chicago, like the Hancock Building and the Sears Tower, all the steel from those buildings came from this site. But the site, it's not actual landmass. What the site is slag, and slag is a byproduct of steel production. So as they produce the steel on the site, they dump the slag into the lake. So there's about a half a mile eastward movement out from the original landmass of Chicago into the lake, and slag that goes down about 40 feet into the lake in order to build this landmass. And this is an image here, which I think it's one of my favorite images that we have, but it's the trains dumping the slag into the lake and building the landmass out as it stands today, or as it sits today. And this is just an image, again, of what the slag looks like and how it sits on the bedrock, which is actually Lake Michigan. So you saw the site as it stood probably 30 years ago at full production. At full production, the site had 160 buildings, and it employed 20,000 people. Today, the land is vacated. U.S. Steel scraped the land when they left, or they stopped production. The reason they scraped the land and left nothing but foundations and utilities underground was that real estate taxes are a lot less on vacant land than they are on buildings. So the landmass, as I said, 600 acres. We've got an image of the site on the right, and on the left, it's superimposed over the central business district of downtown Chicago. So it's bigger than the central business district of downtown Chicago. As I mentioned, there are existing foundations in the ground which provides a significant challenge to future development of the site. But again, that challenge is opportunity from both from a new infrastructure standpoint. And again, existing utilities underground that once were there that served the 160 buildings. None of these utilities are usable and have to be dealt with at some point in time during future development. So when McCaffrey Interest got involved with this site 9 years ago, we developed a master plan for the site. And over a 5-year period, working with the city of Chicago, we bulk zoned the site. It became the largest bulk zoning in the history of the country. And what the site allows us to build today is 15,000 units of housing, over 20 million square feet of commercial use. So you can think of that as retail, light industrial, office, institutional use. Along with 2.5 miles of additional shoreline to continue the Burnham plan along the lakefront. As you can see at the top of the screen is Rainbow Beach, which is where the Chicago Lakefront Trail ends today. We'll continue the lakefront trail with a gift to the city of all the lakefront property down to the end of the site. The city plans to build a marina on the site. They have there's one marina left that has vacancies, and it's quickly filling up. This is the next marina on the agenda for the city. Over time, we think this is a 20 to 40-year development. It'll take as long for us to build out this site as it took U.S. Steel to build out the land, which is an interesting fact. And over time, we think that we'll create about 100,000 construction jobs and 45,000 full-time jobs, which will hopefully backfill what was once there and which was once a vital community that's directly to the west of the site. So once we completed our master plan, we hit 2010. And 2010 was the start of a major recession, and there was no chance for us to start building anything on the site or development. There wasn't money for us to move forward with any substantial projects. And so with the backing of U.S. Steel, we hit a reset button and took 3 or 4 years to really think about a new strategy and a new branding for the site. And what we came up with was sustainability. And we worked with several well-known consultants and contractors, including Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, Cisco, General Electric, University of Chicago, and Argonne National Labs to come up with a sustainable plan for the site. And what we ended up with is the Lakeside idea. And through the Lakeside idea, we focused on 4 areas of sustainability: energy, water, waste, and information technology. And I'll go through each of these very briefly and move on to John. But to start with clean energy, 73% of Chicago's energy today comes from coal. And it's quite, as all of us know, it's dirty energy. And our idea for Lakeside is that we will be 100% clean energy. And whether it be solar, wind, and waste are the 3 major generators of energy that we think that can transform the way that we look at energy in the future. The idea today is that we have a district energy plant. So the energy for the site is controlled by a district energy provider that is on the site. And at some point in time, we would hope that there's enough energy generated that we can sell back to the grid, to Commonwealth Edison. That's the utility provider for the city of Chicago. On the water side, we're a lakefront city, and we want to conserve water and send water back to the Great Lakes. We think it's an extraordinarily important part of conservation for us. Today in Chicago, we send 2 billion gallons of water a day down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. We have created plans to allow us not to have to tie into the stormwater system and send rainwater down the Mississippi River, which is one of the big factors and one of the big water producers going down and leaving our Great Lakes region. So our plan today is to have water hit our pavement, hit the parks, and go through the land, through the slag, and go back into Lake Michigan. And then we're investigating ways to reuse wastewater as well. We haven't, I don't know that there's a great plan for that yet, but we're investigating that. On the waste side, today, the city of Chicago sends 92% of its waste to landfills. We think that much of that waste can be reused, whether it be through recycling, whether it be generating energy with an anaerobic digester or other methods that continue to evolve and over time that I think we'll see and be able to put to use on the site. And finally, on the information technology side, I think that it's one of the things that's really going to be important and a driver to this site. We sit a half a mile from the largest fiber trunk coming from the East Coast through the city, and we'll be able to tap into that and bring that to the site. We'll be able to bring new forms of education. We'll be able to bring enhanced healthcare to the site. We'll have doctors that don't have to be on site. They can see patients in an outpatient facility on a screen. And it will transform the way people live, and it's going to be an important piece of branding for this site. We've won several awards. One of these here is the Sustainia Award, which we received in Copenhagen about a year and a half ago. That is Governor Schwarzenegger presenting us the award. And then we've started to build out the site. So last year, less than a year ago, we opened Lakeshore Drive through the site. The city and the state committed $65 million to building Lakeshore Drive and kicking off this development. What's interesting about the road is it's made with permeable pavement. So again, we lobbied and got them to build a road that didn't send water through the stormwater system, but sent it back through and out to the lake. And we've recently signed our first commercial LOI, and we're hopefully going to kick off development in the next 12 to 18 months on the site with a grocery anchored center that will bring a much needed grocery to a very underserved area today and kick off development. I think there's a couple more images of the site, but I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Tom. And now for, as we continue to increase in scale, we can turn to John Norquist, who...
I'm the tallest one on the panel. Yeah, just go with Al Gore there.
go with Al Gore here. So John Norquist, the tallest one on the panel, will go last. And so we've expanded the scale to think about a large metropolitan area.
All right. Well, I'm going to expand it even more than the large metropolitan area and talk about the whole idea of climate change and global warming and how it relates to energy and buildings and other uses of energy. With the life-threatening problem we had with CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, the problem was pretty much solved. And it was solved without a lot of fuss. The CFC industry complained about it a little bit, but they didn't have a lot of power. They were a fairly small industry, and chlorofluorocarbons were doing a lot of damage, and the damage was being caused by a fairly small group that you could basically just step on and do what was in the public interest. And so with that experience, now we have global climate change with all the issues and all the debate about the details of it. And so it's a little bit different. And for people that are deeply into fighting climate change and trying to do something about it, using the moral argument, the idealistic argument of saving the planet, saving human life on the planet, is very tempting because that's what was done with CFCs, and it worked. Everybody got together, and there wasn't a big fuss across ideological boundaries. There was a little bit, but ultimately the ozone layer issue was addressed. And now we have this huge problem, and so I just wanted to comment on the politics of that, and then I want to talk about what the federal government could do about it as opposed to the metropolitan area government. For people on the left, which would include me, the idealism of it, the moral, you know, it's like fighting slavery in the Civil War era. And Beloit was part of the Underground Railway, so Beloit played a big role in that for this area. Or it's like fighting smoking, but you know, we could all die. You know, the whole thing, it could be like Cormac McCarthy's book where the road to, I'm forgetting, somebody help me, but the road, it's just the road with an article, the, in front of it. Okay, so that catastrophic threat and then the noble fight to change it is influenced by what happened with CFCs. For the conservatives, there's a couple of things that come from that it's obnoxious to them to be accused of immorality and not caring, and then there's also something obnoxious about their political stance, which is they're getting tons of funding, more funding than the Democrats, from the fossil fuel industry, the coal industry, the Koch brothers, et cetera, to take a position they might not believe in if they actually thought about it. So there's some good and bad there. But when Al Gore talks about climate change, to them, I think it's like a trump card that says, shut up. You know, do what I say, do what Al Gore says, and be quiet, and just do it. We don't need to argue about this. This is a big problem. And that isn't very appealing. That's not much fun for them. And they didn't have that experience with the CFC for a lot of reasons, but they're having it now, and they don't like it. And so we have this polarized situation. And many people, most scientists, think that this problem is one that is very serious. It's not debatable. All right, then we have people doing things about it. And what we just heard from the three previous speakers is that energy efficiency, you know, it's good for the environment. It can be cost effective with the river power plant becoming part of the campus. You're sincerely looking at that to make sure that it actually is efficient. So you have a lot of things driving it. Amory Lovins, who Mark referred to, did an article in the Foreign Affairs magazine about a year and a half ago where he was very optimistic about what's happening with the environment because the business community is actually making things more efficient. They're treating energy efficiency the way they do labor productivity. For a conservative business kind of person, labor productivity is something easily understandable. You have less labor input, less spending on labor, and more output. And we've seen, you know, the growth in the 20th century was all about labor productivity. But now energy productivity, I think, naturally can appeal to the business interests and the capitalist system so that we end up with businesses buying into it. The politics of it don't do that. So you end up with actually in some cases, obstructing energy efficiency because of interest groups that benefit from energy inefficiency. And coal would be the obvious example. Now, coal 100 years ago was on the other side of the equation. It was more efficient than burning forests, burning logs out of the forest. So they were more efficient. But now they're on the wrong side of the technical equation and on the efficiency equation. And so this creates a real political problem. And then with the Supreme Court decision that says anybody that can spend as much money secretly on campaigns as they want, they have the freedom to do it, that changes the politics. And so we're in a really difficult situation. And it's not enough to be morally indignant. You actually have to come up with arguments that make sense to a broad cross-section of the American people. And struggling to do that is really important. All right, so we talk about energy efficiency and LEED. And the original reason to do LEED was idealistic, to save the environment, save the world. But we keep learning more about it. And we also know that it has to be sustainable in the market. So one of the things, LEED ND, which I was involved in, I was on the core committee that created LEED neighborhood development. And we did that because a green building for the Hong Kong Bank or HSBC Bank, their Midwest headquarters in Chicago, was rated gold, but it was built 3 miles from the nearest transit stop. It moved from its inefficient building right next to a metro stop where about 30% of the workers use transit, to a spot where they couldn't, and so everybody had to drive. And so the idea of giving a gold award to HSBC Bank didn't make sense. And even more obnoxious, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which has been scolding people appropriately for the last 50 or 60 years about polluting Chesapeake Bay, moved their headquarters from downtown Annapolis to a peninsula where everybody, the only way to get there was by driving or by oyster or clam boat. And they also got a gold award. So we raised hell, NRDC and my old group, the Congress for the New Urbanism, we raised hell with green building, and they decided to look at location as a factor. So all these things have to fit together. It's not, if you have a gold or platinum building and everything else forces. And then the federal government got into the act, and I actually thought it was appropriate. The Partnership for Sustainable Development was a way for the feds to blow some money to try to stop the recession, the Great Recession. And thank God that they spent some money. The recession would have been much worse. But in terms of the long run, setting up programs where the federal government teaches the local governments how to do things, and with these little grants, eventually the efficiency of it will break down. So I'm not very optimistic. I tend to agree with the Republicans in the long run on these programs. But the partnership could focus on something else. It's EPA, HUD, and DOT, US DOT. All right, now let's just start with housing, with HUD. In 1934, when the Federal Housing Act passed, and this is in 1933 when Hoover was handing over the power to FDR, Hoover had already put all kinds of things into the rules, a model code for housing in 1931, all kinds of things that encouraged energy inefficient location for development in the United States. And then Roosevelt included it all into the Federal Housing Act, which ended up with FHA and eventually Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. After World War II, they became activated. And a really big program you've never heard of, HUD 221D4, which is most of the multiple family or apartment housing that's built in America, now goes through that one program. And they all discriminate against mixed-use buildings. And what's the significance of that? Well, there's no significance in Manhattan, the upper west or east side of Manhattan, because the buildings are all 16, 30, 25 stories. But everywhere else, what it does is it takes away financing, the ability to finance the apartments above these stores. This is in Brooklyn. This is in the over the Rhine district in Cincinnati. This is in Milwaukee, Mima's Restaurant, for any of you that have ever been there. Mima lives up above in that little apartment where the lights are on and has a tremendously energy efficient walk down the stairs to get to her business. But this is what the federal government finances without, you don't have to go through any exceptions process or anything. This is what the highway apartments with nothing else in the building, or this. This is one that got a green certification because it was green. And this tremendous real estate product, Newberry, would not be financeable if it wasn't such a successful street. It was built more than, it's an old street in Boston. And it has retail on the first floor and 4 stories of apartments above. And a block away, there's another Newberry, is Commonwealth Avenue with no retail. And, it's just residential, beautiful street, very valuable. All right, so, so both of those streets, one is mixed use, one is not mixed use, and it was Boston that decided to do that, not the federal government, not federal housing, not Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. But today, it's almost impossible to build a Main Street because of these financing mechanisms that were put in place for good reasons perhaps at the time, but now pervert the development process. You couldn't build Mayberry except as a stage set. That's Barney with Opie and Floyd's Barber Shop, where Barney's girlfriend Thelma lived above the store. You couldn't build that and get it financed through any of the federal programs. This is Annapolis. Or Zurich. People say, well, there's a risk. When I first confronted FHA about this, they said there's a risk. You might not, the business might not do well, and then that would affect the financing of the housing. So we just, that we really just can't do that. But look at Zurich. That's the best retail sales per square foot street in Europe. And it's mixed use on the first floor and apartments above. If it's the riskiest, how come it's the most valuable? So anyway, the developers have tried to do it. They've tried to build stuff, live-work units and so forth. Can't get them financed. You can see it in redeveloping districts, the artsy kind of Soho loft districts you'll find in cities, even in small cities. Beloit probably has a few buildings like this. This is one in Buffalo, and you couldn't finance it through normal financing, but this is Art Space Buffalo. But this is the financing package they have to go through to build that building, which is very popular. The millennials and the hipsters and all that love buildings like that. But look at that long list. And that's not even the end of the list. Look at the next, we missed one. This is the other funders, all the foundations, just for one building with 48 apartments in it. So anyway, the trends are changing though. Fortunately, the market's pushing this stuff. Targets, now, instead of being in remote locations in giant parking lots, they're locating, this is the old Louis Sullivan, Carson Peary Scott building in Chicago, which is now Target on the first 2 floors and apartments and offices above. All right, and then I'm going to very quickly, the other thing, the partnership, the sustainability partnership of HUD, EPA, and DOT ought to look at is how they force the building of these city-killing roads, real estate value-killing roads, like Highway 51 out here, which is way too big. What is this street again? Pleasant Street? It's not pleasant enough. But they only build ugly roads. They don't build, see the stuff up there in the corner? That's the local roads. This is from the Wisconsin DOT. And their only thing is about battling congestion, when actually congestion isn't all bad. It's like cholesterol. You have good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. any place that's successful real estate with lots of people coming and wanting to be there is going to have congestion. But they always want to build stuff like that or these big highways. Now, this is one that was torn down in San Francisco, the Embarcadero, built right in the middle of the city. Tore it down, and the real estate values went up 350% just in the year that they decided not to rebuild the freeway. And in Seoul, South Korea, this 180,000 cars a day, they took it out, billions of dollars of value. They restored a river that the freeway had been built on top of. That's the mayor at the time, Lee Myung-bak, who was later elected president. Look how happy that guy is. And he should be happy. Billions of dollars of value. All right, but things are getting better. The water engineers understand that wetlands are good. They're not going out deliberately trying to kill wetlands like they used to. And now the transportation, traffic engineers are starting to understand that the street grid is like the wetlands. Just like wetlands slow down water congestion, distribute the waters, and are a great setting for plants and animals and other cool stuff. Same thing is true with the street grid, which the federal government has been on a war to kill for many years. And so you places like Wicker Park, they're congested, just there are 3 streets coming together here. They're all very relatively narrow. They're all congested. But the neighborhood's congested with people and money and artists, and everybody wants to be there despite the fact you can't drive fast. Same thing in Toronto. All right, but what's good is that the federal government, after forming this partnership, and instead of just giving out grants and spending more tax money, they actually thought. And they listened to the Institute of Transportation Engineers, who did this manual. That's the traffic engineering professional group, and of course, Congress for New Urbanism, and me. I was on the committee. And we produced a book that said that the purpose of the streets in an urban area, which could be Beloit or Chicago or Milwaukee or whatever, but the purpose of the street is to support the value of the place where it's built, not just to move traffic fast. I had my hair cut at, what's that barber shop a few blocks away from here today. In that nice little downtown, you've got a few blocks that are really cool. And that street supports those businesses. It's not just a place to blow your Dodge Ram pickup truck through at tremendous speed. So these things are changing. Things are getting better. People are starting to think more comprehensively. And we've got to start to bring everybody together, even people that are on the right politically, to understand that our infrastructure, our buildings, they need to add value to society. They need to add value, and they need to improve the environment. If you put all these things together, we'll all get rich, and we'll live to enjoy the money. Thank you.
We'll all get rich and we'll all get to enjoy the money. On that note, let me invite Professor Robert Stavins up to respond to this rich array of panelist comments. Yes, indeed. Good question. Can I blank that? You don't need this anymore. Here we go.
Great. Thank you, Warren. It is indeed challenging to try to respond to 4 such diverse and interesting presentations. I'm going to try to provide something of a conceptual framework to put this into context, what we've heard, and I'll offer some agreements and I'll offer some disagreements along the way. In the spirit of free and open intellectual exchange, the hallmark of Beloit College, and I'll even try to be somewhat provocative, although I'm worried about trying to deal with any provocation of a former mayor that's that tall. So first of all, what Warren started us out with was thinking about public policy in this domain. And so we first of all have to ask, after all, we've heard some really good news. It all pays for itself. It's all going to take care of it. In fact, if you have some government commissions and they do the right thing, there's not a problem. So maybe we don't really need public policy. Well, my point is going to be that we do, and that anything other than getting the prices right is going to be trivial. Trivial. I didn't say it's not going to be as important. I said it's going to be trivial in terms of dealing with the overall problem which has been framed for this week, which is the challenge of global climate change. Now, in this area of energy efficiency, which is a very important part of the potential solutions to the problem, a part, not the whole, in order to ask whether or not there's a need for public policy, conceptually what we usually start with is by thinking about what's come to be known as the energy efficiency paradox. And that is the apparent reality, and let's emphasize apparent, the apparent reality that there are energy efficiency technologies, very sophisticated ones or simple ones like higher R value of insulation for your wall, that there are energy efficiency technologies which would pay for themselves in terms of their energy cost savings over their useful life, but are nevertheless not adopted. That's an observation that's been made around the world. It's much discussed in policy circles, in business, and in academia. So let's think about what the potential explanations are for that apparent paradox, that here are these technologies that would really pay for themselves, and yet they're not getting adopted and used, because the right explanations will determine what the right policies are. If we don't understand what the cause is, we're going to come up with crazy policies which aren't even going to address the issue and could even be counterproductive. So the first potential explanation that's been examined, and part of this I'm drawing on a research project I'm running together with a former student of mine now at Duke University, but one of the three categories of potential explanations for this energy paradox are a set of market failures. And by market failures, I mean situations in which the market is not working the way Adam Smith might have imagined it, that not all the right price signals are being felt and not all the right goods and services are being produced. Now, one of those market failures that bears upon some of what we've heard tonight is what economists call a principal agent problem, but forget about the jargon. What I'm referring to in this case has to do with buildings, whether they're residential, they're commercial, or they're industrial, that are renter occupied. Because when buildings are renter occupied, it means that the renter does not have an economic incentive to put in place the energy efficiency technologies. Just think again about insulation to keep it simple. That might pay for themselves, because even though that renter is paying the energy bills, when the renter moves on somewhere else, he's not going to rip the insulation out of the walls and put it on the secondary market. That insulation gets capitalized into the value of the property, which is owned by the landlord, not by the renter. So he doesn't face the right incentives. The landlord doesn't face the right incentives because he's not paying the energy bills. So we have what economists call a principal agent problem. It's a market failure that suggests that even getting the prices right would not be sufficient, and that's the economic justification for things like zoning rules or building codes. Another market failure that's even more important in this realm has to do with research and development. So I have a smartphone here, and for those of you who are at least halfway up the aisle or in the back of the room, you wouldn't know whether, you could not possibly know whether this is an iPhone or whether it's another device made by the BlackBerry company in Canada called a BlackBerry Storm 2. They're both smartphones, they have touch screens, they're shaped the same, they look the same. All the research and development that brought us the iPhone was done by the Apple Corporation. They paid all the costs. BlackBerry did not buy patent rights. BlackBerry did not violate patent rights. BlackBerry learned by observing. There is a huge spillover of benefits from basic R&D. This is something that economists have been studying for 75 years and have quantified. over and over again. What that means is that a company carrying out basic R&D pays all the costs, but it doesn't get all the benefits. There's a positive externality to others. That means the ordinary market functioning well, we would think, provides an underincentive for basic R&D, and therefore an underincentive for technological change, which is hugely important in the context of global climate change, because in order to address this problem, it is going to be necessary to bring down costs of addressing it tremendously over time through technological change. Okay? So those are two examples of that first category of potential explanations of the energy efficiency gap, why things that look like they would be cost effective to adopt are not adopted. Those are the market failure explanations. A second category is what we tend to think of as behavioral explanations. A huge area of explosive growth in economics over the last 15 years is in an area, a realm that's called behavioral economics, which essentially recognizes that people are not economic rats, that they don't simply operate in terms of very simple economic signals, but all sorts of other things are going on. For example, they might suffer from economic myopia, that is, not take sufficiently serious the future. So therefore, people might not adopt those technologies that would pay for themselves over time because they don't really think about the time as much as a business would, which is why, in fact, we see the energy efficiency paradox exist among individuals in terms of homes and sometimes small business, and we don't view it with large businesses. Because of the pressure of the bottom line, they do tend to take it into account. They don't suffer from that myopia, perhaps ironically. The third reason brings in the word apparent paradox, and that has to do with mismeasurement. There is what for many people is the famous McKinsey cost curve. For us, it is the infamous McKinsey cost curve, which claims to show that many approaches to addressing climate change, the costs would not only be small, they would be negative. And when people have investigated this, to whatever degree we can, because McKinsey won't open up, obviously it's proprietary, they won't open up and show us the calculations, but to whatever degree you can try to reverse engineer this, what you find is that a lot of adoption costs weren't taken into account. The adoption costs are not only the out-of-pocket costs, the adoption costs are the opportunity cost of my time, the cost of my learning how to put in place a particular technology. So it's an example of that third category, that it's simply mismeasurement. Now, what all of this really leads to, and I guess my second major point really, is that what really will be needed is an increase in energy prices. In particular, prices that are proportional to the carbon content of the fossil fuels, obviously the highest for coal, next for petroleum and natural gas, and then zero increment, obviously, for renewables that do not have carbon intensity associated with them. But I want us to recognize that rather than stigmatizing corporations as being systematically evil, we should think about the fact that these policies, which might be net beneficial to society, and therefore I might favor them or you might favor them, that they will help some companies, but they're going to hurt others. And when they hurt those companies, it's not just hurting the executives, it's hurting shareholders. And the shareholders are mutual funds, and the mutual funds are held by your unions. It's hurting all of us, and it's hurting the labor. And it's not just the management, it's the 175,000 employees that are not at that top level. So I'll give you an example of this. If we were to raise energy prices, it would be great for General Electric, which is why General Electric has been out in front of all the companies I can think of. They've been more out in front on every discussion about aggressive climate change policy in the United States. Why? Because an increase in energy prices brings about premature obsolescence of all energy-consuming durable goods, whether it's something unimportant like a toaster or something extremely important like the engine in a jet aircraft. Right away, when energy prices go up, then there's a reason to get rid of that piece of equipment you've got and get the more energy-efficient product. So another example, even more dramatic perhaps, is that Boeing Aircraft Company, and Airbus for that matter, have been huge supporters of more aggressive climate change policy. Why? Because, in fact, the reason commercial airlines buy new aircraft is because of the cost of jet fuel, which is their largest cost of delivering their services. What about United Airlines? What about American Airlines? Their shareholders, their employees. For them, it's systematically bad. So, and if you look at the set of corporations and who supports policies and who doesn't support policies, it's not that some are good guys and some are bad guys. It's some are systematically going to be helped and some are systematically going to be hurt. So energy efficiency is an important part of the story, but energy efficiency is not going to do it on its own. All calculations that I've seen that have been done that to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to the degree that will be necessary, which is essentially to zero eventually, that energy efficiency will, although in the short term, be a large part of the cost-effective mix because there are some low-cost opportunities there. In the long term, it will be diminishingly smaller and smaller. Rather, what will be needed is more costly moves from coal to petroleum to natural gas and to renewables. So finally now I'm going to take on the big man. Because I really enjoyed the presentation and I like him, so I want to focus to finish up with this. That, you know, John started with a very interesting discussion about CFCs. I think it's a interesting but terribly misleading example. Because chlorofluorocarbons, which were the cause of stratospheric ozone depletion, the so-called ozone hole, which we really did successfully address, and we did it very quickly. The CFCs were produced by a very small set of countries, namely one plus a couple of others, but the United States. So we didn't have the global commons problem that we have of it needing international cooperation. It was relatively low cost to go to substitutes, and the key substitute had already been developed and was controlled by DuPont. So they were supportive of it, and we made the change. And we don't have that situation, obviously, with phasing out fossil fuels. So I'm afraid that it's a very good story, and I teach it because it's such a wonderful example of successful public policy in the environmental domain, but it's not as helpful as one might think. The second issue that came up was the idea of the morality of the issue. I think any issue that we look at, whether it's environmental policy or anything else, but certainly any environmental issue, can be examined from any one of numerous perspectives. It could be from a moral perspective, a religious perspective, an ethical perspective, or it could be a scientific perspective, physics or chemistry or biology. It could be an economic perspective, or it could be a political perspective. To me, the question is, which perspective is most likely to help us to design solutions that in the real political world in which we exist are most likely to be effective? And my fear is that characterizing climate change as a moral issue, as many of my students back at Harvard like to do, that characterizing it a moral issue will play into the horrid political polarization that we have in Washington and that has in fact changed climate change policy from a scientific, economic, and political issue into an ideological issue, much like abortion. And you know, like with abortion, with a woman's right to choose and a right to life, more information about the science of reproduction, gestation, and birth is not going to move anyone from one side of that issue to the other. I'll condemn both sides. They're not going to move because it's a moral issue. And likewise, when we do that with climate change, it means there will be no movement. We will maintain this political polarization of ideology. So I worry about that. I think that looking at it as a scientific, economic, and ultimately, of course, political problem is going to be more effective. The economy is becoming more energy efficient. It's not something that happened 5 years ago. It didn't happen 10 years ago. The U.S. economy has been becoming less energy intensive. That is, higher amount of GDP for use of energy for 37 years. And that's for a simple reason, because energy comes at a price. And in our economy, anything that comes at a price, as John correctly stated, such as labor, firms are going to want to economize on. So firms want to economize on energy, and individuals like all of us want to economize on energy. And that brings me to conclude with where I really started, and that is what's going to be needed are public policies that increase the price of energy in proportion to the carbon intensity of its source. And maybe that means carbon taxes, maybe it means CO2 cap and trade of some kind, or other policy instruments that I don't know about. But I think the political reality is that not in heaven, but in the real world in which we exist, anything other than getting the prices right is ultimately going to be trivial by comparison. End of sermon.
Well, this is the point in the program where we can open the discussion up to questions from the audience. So if our panelists would like to come forward, and let me also.
If I could, I wanted to rebut the non-rebuttal. In that, I agreed with everything you said. And I thought I said pretty much, I mean, this, what you said at the end, I thought I had pretty much said that, and getting to the pricing, getting to capping or an energy market, trading market, to get to that right now requires an extraordinary, delicate argument. It'll take an effective argument to get the conservative end of the spectrum to even listen to it, because it was as you know, it was a conservative, the idea of cap and trade was a conservative idea. You know, places like the Heritage Foundation were promoting it. And so I think liberals, Al Gore, et cetera, have to change their argument. The moral argument is offensive to the conservatives, which is too bad, but it is. And so that needs to be de-emphasized, and instead it has to be about economics and casting analogies like labor productivity, which to conservatives is something easily appreciated, and to energy productivity, which the business community by and large understands, but the political system doesn't at this point. If you went in to the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives in Washington and started talking about cap and trade, you'll be thrown out of the room. They'd be angry about it. They'd be furious and screaming at you. So it's not even on the table, but it probably is the best possible solution to get through this problem. And I think we agree.
Well, let me look for questions from the floor, and let me bring you the microphone because this event is being streamed, so the microphone picks up the signal for the streaming feed.
This is a question. Yeah. Okay.
It's a streaming feed, but it doesn't go to the loudspeaker, so you still have to speak loudly.
Okay. Just looking at issues of morality surrounding climate change, my question is, when moving away from climate change as a moral issue, how then should we have discussions about generational and cross-sectional equity that play a role in facilitating compliance with any successful public policies?
And are you asking that question of the entire panel or someone in particular?
This is particularly directed towards Professor Stevens.
So,
Did you want me to use that microphone for the same purpose?
There we go.
So the question was, as I understood it, if we're departing from moral perspective on climate change, then how do we deal with intergenerational equity? And I think you're absolutely right that intergenerational equity is important. Equally important, by the way, is cross-sectional equity. There are people in developing countries around the world that are suffering from the two most important environmental problems in the world right now. 15 million people will die next year of air pollution, indoor cooking fires, women and children. 15 million. Another 15 million people in the developing world will die next year as a result of a lack of potable water supplies. So we have a cross-sectional element as well of distributional equity, which has nothing to do with climate change. Climate change is a longer-term problem of when damages will be. The reality is that all of the analysis that's done in terms of how the problem is going to be approached fundamentally takes that into account. and that this is an area, unlike almost any other area that I've worked in the environmental sphere, where rather than thinking only in terms of efficiency, that is, maximizing the difference between benefits and costs, it's fundamentally important to think about distributional equity. But I just want to remind you that that distributional equity is not just the temporal one, but is also the cross-sectional one. The entire nature of the negotiations and what I just came back from in Copenhagen, and while I'll be down in Lima, Peru in a month, are all about that. That's in fact the focus. In fact, I would say there's virtually no focus on efficiency. The focus is almost entirely on distributional equity.
Another question.
Mr. Hanson, you spoke about regulation, both an incentive program that's offered by the state of Wisconsin for the monastery project, but also that the regulation in the state of Wisconsin prevented it from being a net zero project. So could you speak a little bit to the state of regulation in Wisconsin for energy efficient buildings, and if that might be changing anytime that you could see in your business?
Yes. So in the monastery project, and in actually many of our projects when they occur in the state, we look to the Focus on Energy program that is continues to change year to year, so it's not a steady situation. Has incentives for both renewables, and those have fallen dramatically in the last few years, and incentives for efficiency improvements, and this across the board, residential, ag, commercial buildings, industrial. And those measures have been holding up better. So that's what's available. Do they change dramatically, the decisions? Not much, because they're pretty much at the margin. But when you have them there and you're trying to piece everything together for the owner, they're obviously interested. Do any of these incentives apply? And you get the ones that do. In terms of how we were constrained right now in Wisconsin, the basic issue is that there are fairly limited allowances for how much renewable energy that you can connect to any given electrical meter. In the case of Madison Gas and Electric, which was where the utility serving the monastery, it's 100 kW per meter done. So you cannot exceed that. They will not interconnect. You're not allowed to be interconnected. There's also limits in place in terms of if you have a lot of renewable relative to the size of the building, and you have times of day when you need to export that energy back to the grid, the buyback rate by the utility is quite low. And right now, as you may be aware, there is a battle going on with the utilities for various reasons, including perhaps over-investment in fixed costs, excess capacity in generation, transmission, and so on. They're trying to figure out how to reallocate these fixed costs, and they want to pick it up particularly from small users that may be in part small because of efficiency gains in the past, and renewables. So it's going to be particularly harsh on that. That is a changing picture. We don't know how that's going to be an ongoing discussion, and it is emerged as a national conversation that is being handled rather differently in different states, and a lot of interesting arguments about that.
Other questions? Well, let us all thank our panelists, and there'll be a reception at the conclusion here. Thank you very much.
Nice job on the presentation. Nice job. I didn't intend to misrepresent what you said. I misunderstood perhaps, but I didn't intend to. I hope you know that.
Thanks for getting some part of this. Pretty much agree. I read some students push back and said that the moral argument is important to me. Yeah. That shouldn't be limited.